Hello and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be my first ever episode of my Dark Tower series. So I have just finished reading The Gunslinger. This is the very first book in the Dark Tower series, and this is the one that is suggested to read first. So I kind of have this idea that I wanted to get this corkboard and put different kind of vibes for each book up here, and maybe like I can see some connections of vibes between the books. So kind of the imagery I wanted to pay attention for in this book is the desert. A large chunk of this book takes place in the desert. A minecart, a whole chapter takes place underground with a minecart. We'll get into that later. I have a saloon, like an old Western place to drink beer saloon. I have the book cover of The Gunslinger, which has the main character Roland and his hawk. The hawk is kind of one of those like side things that I think is kind of important, and I'm wondering if it's going to come up later. And then I have two tarot cards, the Hanging Man and the Tower, and I'm just realizing that both of these are upside down. So I will fix that soon. So the book is split up into 5 different chapters, and then each chapter has different subsections in it. This video is going to be spoiler filled, just so that I can look back on it and remember what happened in each of the books. And I'll have like time codes and stuff linked below if you want to skip all the spoiler stuff and just see my final thoughts on the book. That's fine too. So in chapter 1, we're introduced to the main character, the Gunslinger. We don't know exactly what his name is yet, but we find out later that his name is Roland. So Roland is said to be the last gunslinger. It's not really explained what that means until way later, but this is the beginning of the theme that I have a lot of questions on what's going on in this book, and some of them are answered later on, and a whole lot of them are not answered. So we're introduced to Roland, and he's in a desert, and he's walking across a desert, chasing after the man in black. We don't know why, we don't know who the man in black is, but he is following him, and he doesn't know exactly how far away he is or how close, he's just following him. So Roland gets to this man who's living in the desert, and he kind of stays with him to kind of rest and everything, and tells him a flashback of the last town he was just in. So then the majority of the chapter is taking place in this flashback. So we go back to the town where it's kind of centered around the saloon, which is why I have it on my corkboard. Without going too much into detail, we know that the man in black has been here before Roland was, because he talks to the barkeep Allie, who then starts another flashback. So we're in a flashback in a flashback. This is also a theme that carries on through the book, where there are multiple flashbacks happening. So while the main story is taking place of Roland following the man in black across the desert, a lot of things are being explained to us through flashbacks. So Allie tells him that the man in black has brought a man back to life, and we find out that the man in black is a wizard, or that he has magic. I believe they use the word wizard, but for a fact he has magic. So Roland now believes that the man in black has left a trap for him in this town, and we kind of find out that maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He's not allowed to be up here because I don't know if you can see this giant scratch, but somebody has already tried to break this establishment down board by board. Anyways, the town turns on him and they all try to kill him, and Roland ends up killing everybody in the town in order to save his own life. I did skip a part where he goes and talks to this religious lady because something happens here that's a little bit sketchy, and I'm not exactly sure what it was that happened, so I don't want to give my opinion on it in case that I'm wrong. But just know that there's possible sexual assault trigger warnings. So Roland has killed everybody in this town. And we flash back forward to the present, where he's talking to the man whose little dwelling he's staying in for the night, and the man is now a little bit concerned. He's like, well, are you gonna kill me next? And Roland's like, nah, probably not, like, you're probably good. So Roland continues on his journey through the desert, and eventually he comes upon another building that's very worn down and kind of falling apart, and here he finds a little boy, Jake. Jake is a very interesting character. So Jake kind of tells him where he came from, and essentially he says he remembers going to school in New York, and he's walking down the busy streets and he gets hit by a car, and then he wakes up and he's in the desert. This kind of opens up a whole lot of questions, because Roland has no idea what New York is, no idea what cars are, and he's just overall lost. So this is when I start to question, is everything happening in the same universe? Is everything happening in the same time period? Are they in different countries where they're not familiar with each other? I don't know what's going on. Jake is also slowly losing his memory, so he remembers less and less of his life before he wakes up in the desert. Roland decides to take Jake with him on his journey to find the man in black. So they're walking through the desert, and you get the implication that a lot of time has passed again, because they're very dehydrated, they're running out of food, but they feel like they're gaining on the man in black. And eventually they get to a grassy, foresty area where there's trees and grass and water, and basically this saves their lives because now they have water. And in the distance, they can see a mountain. And up this mountain, they're pretty sure they see the man in black scaling the side of the mountain. So they're like, we're very close. Like, we can catch him very soon. So in this time in the forest, Roland kind of forms an attachment for Jake. And Roland starts to tell him about his past, specifically his childhood when he was training to become a gunslinger, and kind of how we know that he is the last gunslinger. So in his part of the world, I don't really know how to describe it in, like, you know, cities, countries, I have no idea. So his part of the world, people have their kids go and train to be gunslingers, and it seems almost like it's like a military situation. And this is where the hawk David comes into play. So Roland has been training the hawk. I'm not sure why, it's not really explained. I mean, maybe it is and I just didn't understand, but he's training the hawk. So we learn that his trainer Court is kind of not a very nice person. He's very aggressive and borderline abusive with these boys, but I kind of feel like he's just doing some kind of tough love when training these boys, because they're training for something important. Don't know what it is, but they're training for something important. So something happens in Roland's home life, and I don't really want to give every single detail happening here, but something happens which leads him to believe he needs to defend his mother. In order to do that, he has to challenge Court, because once he challenges his superior and he wins, then he's officially a gunslinger and he doesn't have to go in training anymore, and he's just like he's risen. So when he first goes to challenge Court is like, are you sure? Like, do you want to wait? Because if Roland loses, then he is banished from the area, exiled, everything. So for this battle, they're allowed to choose their own weapons. Court always picks the same thing, which is this like staff thing. Maybe it's a spear. I don't remember. I don't know. It's one of those details that was just kind of confusing to me. And Roland decides to keep it a surprise. They get to the battle, and Roland's weapon is his hawk David. This is kind of why I think that this is important to the story. So he uses David to attack Court and help him win the battle. David ends up dying. He ends up getting sacrificed. So David is kind of foreshadowing two separate things here. He's foreshadowing a sacrifice that Roland has to make in order to get to the Dark Tower. He's also representing Roland's resourcefulness and his creativity and how smart he is, because he knows that sometimes you have to use the element of surprise if you don't think that you can physically beat somebody in this situation. And I think that this shows a lot about Roland's character. So back to the present, Roland and Jake have climbed the mountain, and there's a tunnel that kind of goes deep into the earth, and so they go into it, and this is where the minecart comes into play. So they're traveling for days and for weeks and for a long time in complete darkness. They have absolutely no light until eventually they come upon these tracks and the minecart, and that makes traveling through the darkness so much easier. And all this time, we're hearing kind of some internal war from Roland, where he's forming an attachment with Jake, but he also knows that Jake is going to be a sacrifice. This is something that Roland talks about a lot before anything actually happens to Jake, and Jake eventually figures it out himself too after hearing the stories of Roland's past. And we're nearing the end of the story. So they get to this part on the tracks where the tracks keep going, but the land doesn't. So the tracks kind of go over a chasm, and they don't believe the minecart will be able to make it over. Like, they think it's too heavy or they're gonna fall. So they decide to walk across it. This is very dangerous for obvious reasons. So they get most of the way across. There's like little wobbles here and there, and they're feeling how dangerous it is. And they see the man in black on the other side, and they start to go a little bit faster, and Jake kind of falls. So Jake is now hanging by the tracks, like holding on to the top, and he's like dangling. Roland is halfway between Jake and the end where the man in black is, and the man in black says, "This is your choice. Either you catch me or you save Jake. What are you gonna do?" Jake realizes his fate. He's like, no emotion, nothing. He's like, I know what's gonna happen. So Roland chooses to go after the man in black, and Jake falls. And this is so eerie because Jake falls and he doesn't make a sound. He doesn't scream or anything. And I don't know how to feel about this scene. It seems a little bit unnecessary, but like necessary at the same time. And the fact that maybe Jake wasn't even alive this whole time, because he talks about getting run over by a car in New York and then waking up in the desert. So is he even real this whole time? Or is he some kind of illusion created by Walter? Because the man in black creates illusions. He's a magician. He's a wizard. I don't know how powerful the man in black is, if that's possible for him, but it's an option. So maybe the illusion of Jake just kind of blinked out of existence, or the man in black really pulls Jake from whatever universe, dimension, time period he's living in and just let him die again. I don't know. So Roland catches up with the Man in Black. So Roland catches up to Walter. They're sitting around this campfire in the very last chapter, and they're kind of just talking, like Roland's asking questions, Walter's answering them, and we kind of can piece some of these questions together from the beginning of the book, but not all of them. I have so many questions and things I didn't even bring up yet, and I don't think I'm going to in this video. So Walter kind of explains how Earth was created in terms of the Bible. So, you know, first there was light, then, you know, whatever. I don't know the order. I'm not religious. But, you know, God commanded, and then things were created. And then he explains what the universe is and, you know, molecules and electrons and gravity and all this stuff. Like, Roland can't really wrap his head around this. Like, he doesn't even know what a universe is. Like, the concept of the universe is not something he can comprehend. And Walter kind of uses a metaphor where he's saying, imagine each grain of sand in a desert is a different universe, a different dimension almost. Like, the word dimension isn't really used, but I mean, that's kind of how I can understand it. And Walter says that all of these universes connect in one tower, and the Dark Tower is like the bridge between all of these universes. And he also implies that there's something at the top of this tower, a room that's maybe where the creator or the end of worlds person is. He kind of implies that maybe it's God, maybe it's not. A lot of things gets talked about, and Roland is kind of like, I don't need all of this information. I only need some of it. Where am I going next? Walter tells him that he has to go to the sea and stuff like that. Also, I skipped over the part with the tarot cards. So before like the conversation, Walter does a tarot card reading to the Gunslinger. The Tower and the Hanged Man were like some of the cards that he draws. And I think that they're important somehow, but I don't know how yet, so I'm not gonna really talk about it in this video. So anyways, Roland wakes up in the morning and he says that 10 years has passed. Like, his hair is gray and his face feels more lined. And sitting across from him, where Walter once was, is a pile of bones. And Roland is kind of saying, maybe that's Walter, maybe it's not, I don't know, he's fooled me before. And then he just carries on his journey, and that's how the book ends. Obviously, I skipped a lot of what happens. I kind of only went over what I think is important. So now for my final thoughts on the book. I ended up giving this book 3 stars because there was a lot happening in this book, but I didn't really feel drawn in. Like, it took me way longer to read than I would have liked. And there was so many times I was just completely lost and I didn't know what was going on, and that kind of created a disconnect between me and the story. So in Jimmy Mango's video, the one that I'm kind of using as a guide for how to read all these books, it's also the video that I mentioned in the introduction video, he suggests reading the Gunslinger first and last, and I'm kind of thinking that that's a very good idea because then I'll be able to understand what's happening a little bit more, and some of these questions I have will be answered. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one. The next book is The Drawing of the Three, which is book 2 in the Dark Tower series, and I'm specifying that that's book 2 in the Dark Tower series because the third book that I'm going to be reading is The Stand, and that is not part of the Dark Tower series. But yeah, so that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!
Rivers run dry, dust spreads in the air. 2 dark days, do you have a period?